We're streamlining our management structure, Patricia, Brent announced while his attention remained fixed on his mobile device. Please clear out your workspace by the end of today. I found myself seated opposite him, processing the weight of his statement as he remained absorbed in his screen messages. The executive office that had been the backdrop for numerous multi-million-dollar negotiations suddenly seemed impersonal and unwelcoming. Nearly 2 decades of dedicated service had been terminated during an informal midday discussion. I comprehend, I responded, maintaining vocal stability despite the wave of disbelief washing over me. I'm grateful for the chance to have contributed to Drexler Capital throughout these years. Brent eventually raised his eyes, appearing somewhat taken aback by my collected demeanor. He had anticipated emotional outbursts, possibly dramatic reactions, something that would warrant security intervention procedures. My tranquil response seemed to simultaneously comfort and let him down. The HR department will process your departure documentation, he went on, his focus already returning to his monitor. Jennifer will arrange your final compensation and exit package. I acknowledged with a nod, rose from my chair, adjusted my jacket, and exited. The transparent door sealed behind me with a gentle sound that somehow carried more finality than any forceful closure would have. I ammed Patricia Long. At 58, I have committed almost 20 years of my professional life to Drexler Capital in Minneapolis, Minnesota, constructing their regulatory compliance framework from the ground up. I developed the specialized reporting platform that has maintained our flawless status with the Securities and Exchange Commission through 15 straight examinations. My contributions weren't flashy or acknowledged during corporate celebrations, but they were precise, essential, and, until this moment, appreciated. Walking back to my workspace, passing by coworkers who remained unaware of recent developments, I reflected on the SEC examination scheduled for the upcoming Wednesday. For 5 months, I had been assembling the required documentation, executing the sophisticated algorithms that produced our compliance reports, and organizing the information that would prove our adherence to federal standards. I arrived at my office and shut the door, pausing against it momentarily. On my workspace lay the initial audit materials, a collection of marked printouts that only I could fully comprehend. My workstation held the sole comprehensive blueprint of our reporting system design. My security-protected storage contained the authentication codes necessary to validate our final submission. And now I had until evening to gather my belongings and depart. I examined my schedule where next week's SEC audit appeared in red, highlighting 5 working days remaining. I felt no need to smile. The countdown had begun, and Brent had just severed the only connection that could stop it. I initially became part of Drexler Capital in 2004 when it remained a moderately sized investment company with aggressive expansion objectives. I had devoted the prior decade to developing regulatory frameworks for financial institutions, and Drexler required someone capable of establishing a solid compliance structure to facilitate their growth. We require someone who comprehends the industry's direction, Harold Drexler, the company founder, had explained during my job interview. Someone capable of creating a system that will expand alongside us. Harold possessed visionary qualities and recognized that appropriate compliance represented more than regulatory duty. It constituted a competitive edge. Under his guidance, I created a specialized reporting platform that predicted regulatory modifications years before their implementation. When the 2008 financial crisis struck and new regulations emerged, Drexler Capital stood ready while competitors struggled to adapt. "This is precisely why I brought you aboard, Patricia," Harold had remarked, patting my shoulder after we successfully navigated our first post-crisis examination. "Because you anticipate future challenges." For years, I maintained 60-hour work schedules, constantly updating and improving the system. I educated personnel, recorded procedures, and personally managed the essential verification stages that demanded my specialized certifications. When Harold stepped down 5 years ago, transferring leadership to his son-in-law Brent Covington, I had expected my efforts would remain valued. However, Brent operated differently. He viewed compliance as an expense rather than protection against disaster. During quarterly sessions, he would check his timepiece while I detailed system improvements. Throughout budget conversations, he challenged the resources assigned to my division. Gradually, my team decreased from 12 experts to merely 4, with most institutional knowledge becoming concentrated in my expertise out of necessity. We must operate efficiently, Brent would declare. The marketplace rewards streamlined operations. What he failed to grasp was that my department's effectiveness stemmed from knowledge, not workforce size. I had structured the system to require minimal staff, but those operating it needed specialized understanding that required years to acquire. Last month, while preparing for the approaching SEC audit, I had arranged a discussion with Brent regarding succession planning. At 58, I wasn't considering immediate retirement, but I desired to ensure continuity. We should establish a knowledge transition procedure, I had detailed. The reporting system demands specific expertise that currently exists mainly with me. Brent had agreed, made notes, and committed to following up. That follow-up evidently became today's termination. As I started collecting my personal possessions, I glanced at the photographs on my desk, my spouse Thomas, our daughter Elaine, our golden retriever Max. They would comprehend. They had witnessed Drexler's changing atmosphere firsthand through years of company functions that progressively became more extravagant and less meaningful. By 3 o'clock, I had packed 2 containers with personal items. My workspace was nearly empty except for my company computer and the collection of audit preparation documents. Jennifer from Human Resources appeared at my entrance, her expression carefully controlled, but her eyes revealing uneasiness. "Patricia, I have your termination documents," she spoke softly, closing the door behind her. "I'm deeply sorry about this situation." Jennifer was 32 and had worked for the company only 4 years. She couldn't possibly grasp the significance of what was occurring, but her genuine concern was valued. "Thank you, Jennifer. These situations occur in business," I responded, accepting the folder she offered. "The severance arrangement covers 6 months," she detailed, indicating the marked sections. "Your medical coverage will extend through that time frame. You'll need to sign here confirming receipt." While reviewing the paperwork, I noticed a confidentiality agreement and a non-criticism clause, standard procedure. But examining them closely, I understood they only prevented me from sharing company proprietary information or making public statements that might harm Drexler's reputation. Nothing prohibited me from simply withholding assistance when the inevitable crisis arrived. "Everything seems satisfactory," I stated, signing the required locations. "I have a question regarding the audit preparation documents on my desk. Should I leave them here?" Jennifer appeared uncertain. "I wasn't provided specific guidance about that. I assume you should leave anything connected to company operations." I nodded thoughtfully. "Naturally, though these particular documents wouldn't be meaningful to anyone without the background I've developed. They're essentially working notes. Perhaps you could send an email to your team explaining the current status," she suggested, clearly attempting to help. "That's an excellent suggestion," I agreed. "I'll handle that before departing." After Jennifer left, I sat at my workstation for the final time. I began composing an email to my small team, carefully recording exactly where the audit preparation stood, approximately 40% finished, with the most crucial elements still requiring my verification credentials and system knowledge. I detailed the files they would need, the remaining steps, and the deadlines for each component. I was comprehensive and professional, as always. But I also understood that without my guidance, this information resembled handing someone individual watch components without assembly directions. I sent the email, copying Brent and Chief Financial Officer Gregory Wells, who would presumably manage the audit in my absence. Then I collected my containers, took one final look around the office that had been my professional residence for nearly 2 decades, and departed. While waiting for the elevator, Marissa Chandler, one of my team members, hurried toward me, her eyes filled with alarm. "Patricia, is it accurate? Are you departing?" she inquired, staring at my containers. "Yes, today concludes my employment," I confirmed. "The company is streamlining leadership. But the SEC audit begins next week," she whispered. "We're nowhere near prepared without you." The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, holding my containers. "I understand," I said quietly. "I just sent an email with directions." "Best of luck, Marissa." The doors closed on her distressed expression, and I descended to the main floor, wondering how long it would take for the complete implications to become clear to Brent Covington. Thursday morning, I woke at 6 o'clock from routine. For 19 years, I had begun my day at this time, checking overnight system notifications and preparing for upcoming tasks. Today, there were no alerts to examine, no reports to assess. I remained in bed beside my sleeping husband Thomas, staring at the ceiling. The freedom felt unusual, empty rather than liberating. I had always found satisfaction in resolving complex challenges, in establishing order from regulatory confusion. That purpose had been suddenly removed, creating an uncomfortable emptiness. By 7 o'clock, with Thomas still sleeping, I went downstairs, prepared coffee, and opened my personal computer. Out of curiosity, I accessed my company email account, which would stay active for 24 more hours according to standard procedures. 27 new messages had arrived since yesterday afternoon. 3 were automated system notifications indicating that scheduled verification processes had failed to complete, processes requiring my authentication. 8 came from Marissa and other team members asking increasingly desperate questions about specific audit preparation procedures. The remainder were from various executives, progressively escalating the issue through management levels. The most recent email had arrived at 6:42 a.m. from Gregory Wells, the CFO. Patricia, I understand your departure was unexpected, but we urgently require clarification on the audit preparation status. The instructions you provided are inadequate for completion. Please contact me at your earliest opportunity to discuss transitional assistance. I closed my email without replying. Thomas appeared in the kitchen entrance, his silver hair tousled from sleep. Already checking on them? He asked with a knowing smile. I closed my computer. Just curious. Thomas poured coffee and sat across from me. A retired engineer, he understood complex systems and the issues that developed when they were poorly managed. How long do you estimate it will take them to realize they're in trouble? He asked. By tomorrow afternoon, they'll understand the problem scope, I replied. The system will deny them access to critical functions when verification periods expire. Gregory is intelligent enough to recognize the consequences, even if Brent isn't. And what will you do when they call? I considered the question carefully. I'm not required to provide free consultation after being dismissed. If they want my assistance, they'll need to make it worthwhile. Thomas nodded. 19 years of dedication deserved better than a lunch-hour termination. By midday, my company phone started ringing. I recognized Gregory's number, but allowed it to reach voicemail. 3 additional calls followed over the next 2 hours, along with text messages requesting urgent contact. At 4 o'clock, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Curious, I answered. Patricia Long speaking. Ms. Long, this is Alan Westbrook from Kestrel Investment Group, said a calm male voice. I hope I'm not intruding, but I learned about your departure from Drexler Capital. I'd be interested in discussing potential opportunities with our company if you're open to conversation. Kestrel was Drexler's primary competitor in Minneapolis, a larger and more established firm with an outstanding reputation. I had encountered Alan at industry functions, but never engaged in meaningful conversation. That's quite timely, Mr. Westbrook. I would certainly be open to discussion. Excellent. Would tomorrow morning be too soon? Say 9 o'clock at our offices. Tomorrow at 9 works perfectly, I replied. As I ended the call, Thomas raised an eyebrow. That didn't take long. The investment community in Minneapolis is small. Information travels quickly. My company phone rang again, Gregory for the 5th time today. This time, I decided to answer. Hello, Gregory. Patricia? Thank goodness, he said, relief clear in his voice. We're experiencing serious problems with the audit preparation. The system is denying verification codes, and no one can determine our status with the documentation. Can you come in tomorrow to help us resolve this? I'm afraid I already have a commitment tomorrow morning, I replied evenly. But I would be willing to provide consulting services at an appropriate rate. There was silence on the line. Consulting rate? Yes, Gregory. I'm now an independent compliance consultant. My rate is $1,200 per hour with a minimum engagement of 20 hours. Friday morning, I arrived at Kestrel Investment Group's offices in downtown Minneapolis 15 minutes early. The reception area was refined without being pretentious: leather seating, tasteful artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It projected exactly the image a client would desire from the firm managing their investments: sophisticated, established, and disciplined. Alan Westbrook greeted me personally, extending his hand with a warm smile. In his early 60s, he possessed the confident bearing of someone who had survived multiple market cycles. "Patricia, thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, guiding me toward a conference room. "I've respected your compliance infrastructure at Drexler for years." The conference room held 3 other people: Kestrel's chief compliance officer, their head of human resources, and their general counsel. The meeting was clearly more than exploratory. "We'll be direct, Miss Long," Alan began after introductions. "We know Drexler has an SEC audit scheduled for next Wednesday. We also know that you constructed their compliance reporting system and were solely responsible for critical verification processes. Their dismissal of you 5 days before a major audit suggests either remarkable confidence or remarkable foolishness." I maintained my professional composure. "I can't comment on Drexler's internal decisions." "Of course," Alan nodded. "What we're interested in is your expertise. Kestrel prides itself on regulatory excellence, and we've been planning to enhance our compliance infrastructure. Your unexpected availability presents an opportunity we'd be remiss to ignore." Their offer was straightforward: a senior position leading compliance technology with a substantial salary increase over what I'd earned at Drexler, plus an attractive benefits package. They wanted me to start immediately as a consultant, transitioning to full employment after 60 days. "We understand you may need time to consider," the HR director said, sliding a folder toward me with a formal offer. "But we're prepared to move quickly if you're interested." I reviewed the documents thoughtfully. The position was excellent, the compensation generous, and the organizational culture seemed to value compliance appropriately. It also positioned me directly in competition with Drexler Capital. "I appreciate the offer and would like to review the details more carefully," I replied. "However, I'm certainly interested in principle." Alan smiled. "Wonderful. Take the weekend to consider. We'd love to have you join us." When I left Kestrel's offices, I checked my phone and found 7 missed calls from Drexler Capital, 3 from Gregory, 2 from Brent himself, and 2 from unknown extensions within the company. There was also an email from Brent with the subject line, "Urgent Consulting Arrangement." I read it while waiting for my car in the parking garage. "Patricia, I understand you've offered consulting services to assist with our upcoming audit. While the rate seems excessive, we recognize the time sensitivity and are prepared to engage your services immediately. Please call me to discuss details. Brent." Just as I finished reading, my phone rang again. "Gregory." "Patricia, have you considered our request?" he asked when I answered, his voice tense. "I received Brent's email acknowledging my consulting offer," I replied calmly. "But I should inform you that I've just concluded a meeting with Kestrel Investment Group about a permanent position. They've made a very attractive offer." Gregory's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Patricia, please. We're in a critical situation. The system is generating error messages we don't understand. The audit team arrives in 5 days." "I'm aware of the timeline, Gregory. Brent has authorized your consulting rate. Can you start today, right now?" I paused, allowing the moment to breathe. "I have another commitment this afternoon. I could potentially begin Monday morning at 8 o'clock. "Monday morning," he repeated, clearly calculating the remaining work days before the audit. "That leaves us just Monday and Tuesday to prepare." "Yes," I replied simply. "That's correct." By Monday morning, the panic at Drexler Capital had reached fever pitch. Over the weekend, I had received 17 more calls and 15 emails escalating in urgency. I had responded only to confirm that I would arrive at 8 o'clock Monday as agreed, with a signed consulting contract in hand. Walking into the building felt surreal. The security guard, Roberto, greeted me with confusion. "Miss Long, I thought you left the company." I'm here as a consultant today, Roberto, I explained, showing him the visitor pass Gregory had arranged. Oh, I see. They've been in quite a state since Thursday. Mr. Wells was here until midnight Saturday. The elevator ride to the 14th floor was quiet. I had deliberately arrived carrying nothing but my purse and a thin portfolio containing the consulting agreement. I wore a new suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, purchased over the weekend specifically for this occasion and for my upcoming meeting with Kestrel on Wednesday. It was important to mark visually that I was no longer an employee but an outside professional. The office was unusually active for 8 o'clock. As I walked through the floor toward the conference room where we'd agreed to meet, I saw stressed faces and heard urgent conversations. Marissa spotted me and hurried over. Patricia, thank goodness. It's a complete disaster. Nothing is working properly. Good morning, Marissa. I replied with professional distance. I understand there are issues with the audit preparation. Her eyes widened slightly at my tone, but before she could respond, Gregory appeared from the conference room. Patricia, thank you for coming. Everyone's waiting inside. The conference room contained Brent, Gregory, the entire compliance team, and 2 IT specialists I recognized. Brent's usual polish was noticeably diminished, his shirt slightly wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. Let's get started, he said without preamble. We have a critical situation with the SEC audit tomorrow. Wednesday, I corrected calmly. The audit is scheduled for Wednesday at 9 o'clock. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Gregory interjected, we essentially have today and tomorrow to prepare. I placed my portfolio on the table and removed the consulting agreement. Before we begin, I'll need this signed and the initial payment processed. 20 hours at $1,200 per hour for a total of $24,000. Brent's jaw tightened, but he nodded to Gregory, who took the agreement. We'll process this immediately, Gregory assured me. In the meantime, can you help us understand what's happening with the system? I turned to the large monitor on the wall where they had displayed the reporting system dashboard. Red error messages populated nearly every module. What you're seeing is the system protecting itself, I explained. The compliance reporting framework operates on a principle of progressive verification. Each module requires authentication at critical points to ensure data integrity for SEC purposes. When those verifications aren't completed within scheduled windows, the system locks those modules to prevent potentially inaccurate reporting. And you're the only one with authentication credentials, Brent stated flatly. That's correct. As we discussed multiple times over the years, the system was designed with segregated authentication to prevent internal manipulation of compliance data. It's actually a selling point with regulators. It demonstrates our commitment to reporting integrity. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Without my credentials and expertise, the system would remain locked, and the SEC would arrive to find Drexler Capital unable to produce required compliance documentation. What exactly would happen if we can't provide these reports to the SEC? Asked one of the junior team members. Gregory and Brent exchanged glances. At minimum, substantial fines, Gregory answered. At worst, trading restrictions while we're investigated for compliance failures. I smiled politely. Shall we begin? By Tuesday afternoon, it was clear that even with my assistance, Drexler Capital wouldn't be fully prepared for the audit. We had managed to unlock the system modules and verify about 60% of the required documentation, but critical components remained incomplete. This is normally a 5-week process, I explained to the increasingly tense room. We're attempting to compress it into 2 days. Brent paced behind the conference table, occasionally checking his phone. What are our options at this point? You could request a postponement from the SEC, I suggested. Cite the recent organizational changes as the reason, and telegraph to the regulators that we've disrupted our compliance function right before an audit. Gregory shook his head. That raises more red flags than it solves. Brent stopped pacing. Patricia, what would it take to complete everything by tomorrow morning? I considered the question honestly. Working through the night might get us to 80% completion, but the risk management attestations require board member signatures, and 3 modules need full verification cycles that take at least 12 hours to process properly. So it's impossible, Gregory concluded. Not impossible, I corrected, but beyond the scope of our current consulting agreement, which ends at 5 o'clock today. Brent's expression darkened. You're saying you'll leave at 5 o'clock regardless of our status? I have a prior commitment tomorrow morning, I replied calmly. A final interview with Kestrel Investment Group. The room fell silent again. Everyone present understood what that meant. I was not only leaving them unprepared for their audit, but joining their primary competitor. How much? Brent finally asked. To stay until it's done. Name your price. I closed my laptop and gathered my notes methodically before responding. The remaining work would require approximately 30 additional hours of my time at an emergency rate of $1,800 per hour, given the overnight requirement. That's $54,000, payable immediately. Brent didn't hesitate.
Done.
Gregory, process the payment right away. I nodded, reopening my laptop. Then I suggest everyone get comfortable. It's going to be a very long night. Wednesday morning arrived with grim faces and empty coffee cups littering the conference room. We had worked through the night, and while we'd made substantial progress, the system was still processing final verifications when the receptionist called to announce that the SEC audit team had arrived. They're early, Gregory muttered, checking his watch. It's only 8:30. Stall them, Brent instructed. Offer coffee, give them the guest Wi-Fi password, whatever it takes. I watched the progress bar on the final verification module, 87% complete. At the current rate, we needed at least another 30 minutes. Should I go welcome them? I asked innocently. As the compliance consultant? Brent's gaze snapped to me. Absolutely not. I don't want them knowing we had to bring you back as a consultant. I nodded understandingly. In that case, you'll need to explain the incomplete modules yourself. The documentation package should include a disclosure about the current status. Gregory looked alarmed. We need to disclose that we're not fully prepared? SEC Regulation 17A 4 requires full transparency regarding any compromised compliance processes, I explained. Attempting to conceal the system status would constitute a serious violation. Brent's face flushed red. This is absurd. We paid you $78,000 to fix this situation. You paid me to assist with audit preparation on an emergency basis, I corrected. I've done exactly that. The fact that the system cannot be fully prepared in the time available is a consequence of decisions made before our consulting arrangement began. The verification progress bar reached 91% as voices became audible from the reception area. The SEC team was being escorted to the designated audit room. What do we do now? Gregory asked, desperation evident in his voice. I picked up my belongings and straightened my suit jacket. You tell them the truth. 3 weeks later, I sat in Alan Westbrook's office at Kestrel Investment Group, reviewing the implementation plan for their new compliance reporting infrastructure. My corner office overlooked the Minneapolis skyline, and a nameplate on my desk read, Patricia Long, Senior Vice President, Compliance Technology. Alan entered with a newspaper, smiling as he placed it on my desk. Have you seen today's business section? The headline read, Drexler Capital faces regulatory sanctions following failed SEC audit. The article detailed how the firm had been assessed a $2 million fine and placed under enhanced supervision after significant deficiencies were discovered in their compliance reporting. Trading restrictions had been imposed on certain investment products until remediation was completed. Unfortunate, I commented, pushing the paper aside. Certainly for them, Alan agreed, taking a seat. Though I understand Brent Covington is no longer with the company. That was news to me, though not entirely surprising. The board finally recognized his judgment issues after a $2 million fine and trading restrictions. I believe they had little choice. The word is that Harold Drexler himself came out of retirement temporarily to stabilize the situation. I felt a twinge of satisfaction at that. Harold had always respected my work and understood its value. Had he still been in charge, I doubt I would have been so unceremoniously dismissed. How's our new system implementation progressing? Alan asked, Changing the subject. On schedule. We should have the framework completed within 6 weeks, well before our next audit cycle. Excellent. The board was extremely impressed with your presentation last week. They've approved the additional budget you requested for specialized staff. As Alan left, I turned back to my computer, where I was drafting job descriptions for the compliance technology team I would be building. Unlike at Drexler, this team would have proper redundancies, thorough documentation, and distributed expertise, measures I had advocated for years but had been denied due to budget constraints. My phone buzzed with a text message from Thomas. Dinner tonight to celebrate 1 month at the new job? I smiled and replied affirmatively. Life had taken an unexpected turn, but I had landed on my feet. Better than on my feet, actually. My compensation at Kestrel was 40% higher than at Drexler. My role had expanded, and the culture valued regulatory excellence as a competitive advantage rather than a necessary evil. Later that afternoon, I received an email from Harold Drexler himself. Patricia, I hope this finds you well. I've returned temporarily to address the situation at Drexler Capital, and I wanted to reach out personally. The decisions made regarding your position were short-sighted and have cost the company dearly. While I understand you've moved on to what I hear is an excellent opportunity, I wanted to express my personal regret about how things were handled. Regards, Harold. I appreciated Harold's message, but felt no inclination to respond immediately. Perhaps in time, the sting of dismissal would fade, but for now, I was focused on building something better at Kestrel. The events of the past month had taught me an important lesson. True value isn't always recognized until it's gone. Expertise built over decades cannot be consolidated away without consequences. And sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't taking action. It's simply stepping aside and allowing reality to deliver its own harsh lessons. As I looked toward the future, I knew that the best response to underappreciation wasn't bitterness, but excellence on a new stage where that excellence would be valued. And that's exactly what I intended to deliver.